Welcome to Work Matters, where we explore what leaders can do to make work more productive, valuable, meaningful, and impactful. I am your host, Thomas Bertels. In today's episode of Work Matters, we take a look at the theory of constraints. My guest is Rami Goldratt. He is the CEO of Goldratt Consulting. He is considered one of the most influential leaders of the TOC movement, specifically with regards to applying it to sales and marketing as well as the education system. He also has extensive global experience in a number of industries, including retail, automotive, textile, chemical, and services. In our discussion, we explore what the theory of constraints is and how companies have successfully implemented it, what kind of challenges can be addressed through TOC, and how TOC impacts managers and employees. We talk about what the typical implementation challenges are and how TOC differs from other improvement methodologies. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and if you do, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with at least one other colleague. Welcome to the Work Matters podcast.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm happy to be here.
I'm a huge fan of your father's work. Your firm is famous for the theory of constraints. Your dad wrote a very famous book, The Goal, among other books that he wrote. So the theory of constraints, what's the big idea?
So the big idea is basically to maintain focus. And I don't think I need to elaborate to what extent today, especially in today's reality, it's very difficult to maintain focus. There's so many requirements, so many temptations that lead you astray. So TOC is all about understanding where are the key constraints, the key focal points that really governs the flow of work in the system. And when you find these constraints, you should figure out how you deal with them in a better way, how to structure the organization to enable you to get more out of these constraints and then get more throughput. So that's like the big idea behind it. It sounds very simple, but my father always said simple is not easy.
I think that's very true. So could you give us an example for maybe a company that you worked with that applied this theory?
I'll give you several examples just so you see the broad spectrum of where constraints could be. One company, for example, in the heavy engineering section industry, they are making high pressure vessels like boilers that goes into refineries, into nuclear facilities and things like that. And obviously, it's a giant operation with a lot of assembly that goes into making these products. But one of the key constraints they have in their flow is in the welding section, when you weld the whole things together. And when we focus there, an obvious way to see bottlenecks or constraints is that there is a lot of work in process that piles up in front of them. So that was very obvious. And when you're able to focus on thinking how you can get much out of this, and by the way, a lot of the work was not with the welders, but with the previous sections and how they brought the work to the welders. So we wanted to make sure that they have something that is called full kit. So once they start welding, they can finish the job. Nothing will be missing, and that they know the specs and all of that. And when you are able to get, let's say, 20% out of a bottleneck, then the entire organization makes 20% more. So this is one example. Another example from a very different industry is an airline. We're working with Delta Airlines, for example. And over there, constraints could be very different things. For example, a constraint in normal operations could be the gate, how you get more flights out of a gate. Another constraint when you have other issues like today in today's environment, it's no longer the gates, it's not even the airplanes that are the constraints, but the crew and the pilots coming out of COVID. And then you need to ask yourself, how do we structure the whole schedule, the whole thing to get more flights, given my new constraints, which are pilots and things like that. So the constraints could be, if you talk about retail environments, the constraint will be how do we figure out to have the right merchandise at the right place at the right time? That's the key constraint. So whenever you focus on the key constraints and you get much more out of it, the organization can make substantial improvements. It's a matter of focus.
So what kind of challenges lend themselves to the application of TOC and maybe also what challenges don't lend themselves, right? Is this like a mostly an operational topic? Is this inside the four walls of an organization or does it also apply to, let's say, constraints in the marketplace?
The constraints do not have to be, or not always are internal. They're not always operational. There are market constraints. So if many companies that we work with, what really constrains their growth is not their internal operation, but how to develop better value propositions so they can sell more and have healthy sales that give them right product, right profits. For this, you need to focus not on your constraints, but actually on your customers' limitations. Because if you want to really come up with a breakthrough product or value propositions, my father said exceptional value is provided when you're able to remove a significant limitation for the customer in a way that was not possible before. So, in order to do that, you need to focus on customers' limitations and think how to remove them. And a lot of our work is in this field as well.
What's the impact of doing this? How does this impact the organization? How does it impact sector managers? How does it impact on employees?
So the financial impact, first of all, is quite clear. If you're able to debottleneck something that really clogs the flow and get much more throughput and sell the throughput, then obviously you have more healthier bottom line, etc. But there are a lot of implications also on the work environment, let's say, on the culture. Because when you're not dealing with the constraints in the right way, and many times it happens when each section has a silo. They're working and they're looking only at their own link. They're not looking at the impact as a whole. Then this creates a lot of conflicts, between different sections of the system, different functions. There are conflicts, even internal conflicts. You look at workers and they know that what they do is meaningless. There is no impact on the overall performance. And this frustration seeks an outlet eventually. So a lot of iterations and things like that. So if you are able to fix the flow, if you're able to debottleneck, if you're able to get much more, if you're able to synchronize everything based on your constraints, you see also a lot of the my father used to call it engines of disharmony. A lot of those engines disappear.
What are some typical challenges in applying this? What are some roadblocks that you run into?
In environments that are more project oriented, so engineer, design, service organizations, where the work is less repetitive, and there are a lot of time these constraints that I'm talking about, we refer to them as obstacles to flow in these environments. One of the major ones, we call it bad multitasking. And bad multitasking happens when people switch between tasks without finishing any of the tasks. Now, when people hear about it and agree with us, then everybody say, okay, so let's prioritize and say which task needs to be done, and the rest we'll put on hold, and everything is okay. But we know that this is just a partial solution. Priorities will not solve the problem, because the reason why people multitask, switching tasks all the time, is not because they like to do it. They do it because priorities change. So if I'm setting priorities now, tomorrow I will change them and I'm bringing back the bad multitasking. So to really solve bad multitasking, you need to put discipline in place to restrict the level of open assignments, of open work in the system. So if each designer or engineer is working, let's say, on 20 assignments in parallel, you say no, they're only allowed to work on 5. And only if they complete one, we will allocate and assign and release another one instead. But this is, again, simple to understand, but very difficult to implement. There are a lot of challenges because everybody will agree that we need to prioritize and put things on hold and only release them when things are open, as long as their assignment is in the pipeline, in the funnel. So everybody agree as long as you don't put their assignments on hold. But once you start to say, no, no, guys, then if everything is open, we're not changing anything, then you see a lot of challenges. And even if people agree and we put assignments on hold and we focus on the right things, then very quickly you get people say, wait a minute, we need to change, something urgent comes, let's stop these jobs and do something else. They bring back the chaos. And now, so you need to really sustain this discipline. And I'm just talking about a simple one element of a solution that we have. Because remember, when you're going to achieve breakthrough results, you have to change some fundamental processes. Otherwise, why would things be different? You need to always ask yourself why these rooted practices that create all these disruptions, why they are in place, what brought them to be. Okay, like bad multitasking. What brought it to be? It's because people want to start all work as soon as possible. That's why they keep pushing more assignments into the pipeline. Okay, and that's a challenge to change. It doesn't happen overnight.
I think it's really interesting what you just said because it also makes me think about the impact of fragmented workflows, right? Because you talked about that multitasking, which is basically people never finish a task. But I think probably the other obstacle is if work is so highly fragmented that the entire task is broken up over like 20, 30 departments or hundreds of people, which makes it really impossible to coordinate all that tightly and create that
Correct.
flow, right? So is one of like the solutions in your toolkit also to expand the responsibilities of people so that they maybe do an entire work product from start to finish?
Okay, that's definitely one of the solutions. One of the problems when you over fragment the work to very specific tasks, like most likely you will have a lot of challenges in synchronization because will now you leave people the freedom to choose which task to take next in their own. Okay, but now what the likelihood that they will pick the right work that is needed for you to finish the entire project on time? Many times these local priorities are not aligned with global priority.
What needs to be in place for TOC to have an impact?
Like any methodology that is aiming to be holistic, because the power of TOC is to focus on the right things to get more throughput out of the entire organization or system. You need, as a condition, you need the buy-in and the collaboration of the top management. Because if you don't have it, I mean, you can still apply TOC, but you will apply it in your own pocket, and you will get more throughput, but more throughput from from your silo. Okay, if you want a global effect, it has to be blessed by the top management. It's quite a strong condition. Okay, it's not one of the advantages other methodologies have, like lean, etc. Everybody can do it in their own area. I mean, and that's very nice, very good. I'm not against it, but a lot of these local improvement then do not translate to a global improvement.
It's like other improvement methodologies. I grew up with the whole Lean Six Sigma framework. Is TOC in competition with Lean Six Sigma? Is it complementary? What's the relationship?
I think that there are a lot of tools in Lean and TOC that are overlapping, but what is important is the way I view it. We're using TOC to look at the system as a whole and understand where to focus. When you know where to focus, you can apply other methodologies on this area, Six Sigma or Lean, whatever it is, to get much more out of it. There's no conflict in this manner. Okay? The conflict really is on the principles of where to apply the tools. Okay, if you just want to fix any problem that comes your way and do continuous improvement everywhere, then that's fine. But then you rely on like chance that you will hit the constraint.
You described earlier how TOC can be applied at the enterprise level, looking overall at the entire system for delta and optimizing access to gates or
Yeah,
whatever
sure.
it might be. But what about if I'm like a middle manager in a large company and I'm responsible for a function or a department? Can I apply TOCs like at the micro level as well?
You can apply TLC, the micro level, but you will the throughput you unless you are a constraint for the entire organization, the throughput you will get is the throughput from your subsystem by applying it. So every system can look at its own operation and ask where is the constraint in my own operation. And by dealing with it, we'll get more throughput for its defined system. Of course, you can do it this way. But again, to get the maximum impact, if you're looking at an organization as a whole, you need to look at it as a whole. But a lot of projects we have are done on a department level or unit level. Usually, the first thing we check though is that this unit or department is really impacting the entire performance of the organization. Otherwise, you can get more improvements, but then they will not materialize into more profit for the whole organization.
The idea of TOC has been around for 4, 5 decades, right? Quite a
Yeah.
while. The
We
goal came
celebrate
out in
this
the
year the 40th anniversary of the book The Goal.
wonderful, which is actually, as I said before, it's one of my favorite books, probably one of the top 10 books on the business side that I've ever read. If people haven't read it, I can highly recommend it. It's a fun read because it's written as a fable, telling the story of a real manager who struggles to get more out of a system and to save his plans. The idea has been around for 4 decades now. So why haven't more people heard about this?
First of all, there are many people that did hear about it. So it's not such a secret anymore like it used to be in the past. I think most graduates from business schools have, at least in one of the courses, one of their professors recommended this book as part of the reading list. So in terms of awareness to the theory, I think that it's quite high, and more in the manufacturing side, project side, less in let's say tech, etc. But even there are a lot of implementations of TOC that I hear about, especially on the project management side, software development side, etc. Is okay. A lot of people read the book The Goal. It's considered to be one of the top five bestsellers in history of management books. But how many people, from the number of people who read the book, how many really applied it? And for me, that's the key question. And it goes back to what I said: simple is not easy.
Yeah. So I would imagine that one of the key challenges is to figure out where the bottleneck is in the first place. And how do you go about that? In my experience, a lot of companies don't really have really good process level data. They got financial metrics, but they don't really have operational metrics on cycle time and throughput and all that.
Yeah. We come and ask them, where is your constraint? And they say, okay, depends which day you're coming to and asking this question. It seems to be moving all the time. In reality, the constraint cannot move all the time. You have a weak link somewhere and it will not change overnight. So when companies struggle to find their constraint, probably it means it's an indication that there is some policy or practice, let's say, that disrupt the flow to the point that creates a bottlenecks in different parts of the flow by design because of this policy, like working in very large batches, like delaying the risky work in a project later on. So everything you do, tasks that are less risky in terms of discovering mistakes. And then you discover all the mistakes later on in the project. Suddenly the constraint is over there. But it's all coming from practices. And of course, we have our tools and analysis methodologies that we use to find these practices. To sit with the management and understand where are the challenges and understand where is we call it the vicious cycle that propel these problems and keep them in a way that we keep facing them. And this vicious cycle will also show us these practices that move the bottlenecks around. Okay,
You
how to
also,
find.
you already mentioned that once you solve like the constraint, the bottleneck, what typically happens is that you find the next bottleneck. And once you solve for that one, you find the next bottleneck. So in a way, this is like an ongoing continuous improvement journey, right? It's not like a one and done.
This is absolutely true. You can control it to some extent. You can already predict what will be your next constraint, and you don't need to wait. You take already actions to prevent it from becoming the constraint, because when your constraint moves, your entire focus moves, your entire synchronization moves. Constraint is not just a bottleneck that you need to open. The constraint is, for us, is also something we call a drum. It's dictate the pace of releasing work in the system. But you can predict them. It's not happening by surprise if you want to analyze the system. The real frustrations I see with companies is that the constraints are moving from market to operations. So many times you have like bottlenecks inside, and you struggle to deliver, the goods on time or faster or reliably, and you put a lot to improve flow, but then suddenly you get excess capacity and you cannot sell it because the bottleneck is outside. You have a market constraint. Then you focus a lot on getting more sales, and you immediately having this is really a are creating a lot of, you talked about frustration of people. This really is frustrating, creating a lot of disharmony in organizations, a lot of finger
So I
pointing.
guess one way to look at this to say you have a system, you find the bottleneck, you fix that bottleneck through some operational improvement, let's say, right? And then you tackle the next bottleneck. But I'm wondering if there's also it's like a design element to that, right? That actually the way we structured the organization is really the root cause, right? It's the policies, it's our budgeting framework, right, that drives dysfunctional behaviors, right? To what extent do you find that it's right management decisions of the past, right, that are really the root cause of flow issues in the present?
So obviously, anything that you see in reality, decisions and actions. What happened in the past happened in the past. I need to understand it just to know how to avoid it from happening again. I start with the way what is happening now and why we keep facing it. Not why it happened, but why we keep facing it. This is what I call the vicious cycle. So, for example, let's take the example of bad multitasking that I spoke about. So, because we have a lot of bad multitasking, we switch tasks without completing any of the tasks. Then the duration of every task gets much longer, and new tasks are coming. So it takes us longer to complete the task, and new tasks are coming. It means that the backlog of tasks is growing rapidly, which means that now we'll be under more pressure to release tasks to work because they are waiting in the backlog. Okay, so you push even more tasks into the pipeline, basically loading resources, people with more tasks. Now they will be even in more hectic bad multitasking. Okay, and then it's a vicious cycle. This is happening because the backlog is big and because we have an assumption that we need to release tasks as soon as possible. Okay, and then this is where I need to focus. The way to solve it is to restrict the release and to release it in a control manner, etc. The idea again is not to look so much to the past, but to ask yourself, why do I keep facing the problems?
If I were to start a business from scratch, I'm a fast growing business and I want to design the organization to scale seamlessly, right? Besides like waiting until the constraints show up and then trying to tackle them. But is there like a design approach, design the organization for flow?
Let me maybe pinpoint to two elements in what you said. When you spoke about, I want to set up a new business, then the first thing that I will say before you design the operation of the business is to really ask the tough question, what is the value that you give? Focus there, first of all, because if you don't get this right, then you can structure your operation as much as you want. You have a lot of conflicts later on, a lot of problems that will come from the struggle to get more sales and the competition and the red ocean and all of that. I see a lot of organizations that struggle to scale, especially because work in this organization is less standard. So it's not so repetitive. If it's a repetitive work, then scaling is just a matter of buying more machines in the right time, etc. Of course, it's an investment decision, but the challenge is monetary challenge. The in organizations that struggle that the work is not standard, like highly engineered organizations or service organizations like consultancy, for example. In these organizations, the struggle to scale is not monetary, it's something different. Because if work is not standard, it means that your operations undoubtedly relies on experienced people. Let's call them experts. These are people with accumulated expertise that know how to manage this non-standard work, how to make the right judgment calls. Now, these people obviously are scarce, they're not easily found, and they take time to develop them. Now, if you want to scale, it means by definition that you will introduce an influx of non-standard work into the system. Immediately these experts will become a bottleneck. Now, work cannot wait for them to do the job, which means that unavoidably less experienced people will now need to do the job and they will not be able to wait for the experts to guide them. If less experienced people need to do the job, what do you think will happen? Mistakes, obviously. Now, who needs to fix the mistakes? The experts, the ones who are super busy. So now, in addition to their daily job and in addition to train the new recruits, they also need to fix all these mistakes. Now they're even more busy, even more work will be done by less experienced people, and the vicious cycle continues. And then everybody in this organization will cry for standardize in order to scale. And but then there is a mistake. We think that standardization is writing the SOP, standard operating, writing the manual. Okay, work in this organization is not standard, so it's impossible to write a manual that will cover all cases. And when you try to do it, who needs to write the manual? Again, the experts, the ones that are super busy. And even if they write it, there are so many exceptions now, and people will stop using it, and you're back into the vicious cycle. Standardization is not just about writing a manual or an SOP. That's maybe the end goal. Standardization really is your ability to rely less on experts. That's standardization. And the less you rely on them, the more you can scale without compromising your quality. And there is a whole methodology now how to go about it, which is basically dealing with the constraint to scale, your experts. You first need to ask yourself, what is the job that only they can do? What is this expertise that requires judgment? And then after you define it, Look at what they're doing, and surprise, surprise, you will see, let's say, not 100% of their time is this work. I'm being humble now, right? You will be able to see that you can at least take 20, 30% offload from them, especially if you promoted them to be managers. A lot of their work will be in managing people, not in doing this expertise. To promote them, I'm not saying you should not, but try to do it without adding non-expertise job to their portfolios. Once you're able to find this non-expertise job they're doing and to offload it from them, now comes the toughest part in the process, the most challenging part. You need to overcome the temptation to fill up the capacity of the experts because that's the temptation. They are a bottleneck. So if I'm able to free up the work, let me bring them more work to do. That's a mistake because if your end goal is to scale, then it means that you should not look on the most short-term throughput. You need to build organization to scale now, right? You need to take the capacity that you freed up from them and use it for them to prepare the less experienced people. We call it in TOC to full kit, to prepare the less experienced people to do a specific job. And it could be the preparation is not only at the beginning, it could be with several milestones that I check the work, right? But this is how you ramp up the less experienced people to do the job right with less mistakes and to scale. Okay, I told you now it's just part of the process, but that's how you deal with constraint. That's how you structure an organization to scale. And of course, one of the biggest things that you can do, if you can do, is to try not to scale, not to introduce business that will require much of their expertise. So try not to go to totally new markets or things like that. Will just to increase the non-standard work that comes in.
The old adage is knowledge is power. And if I were like a very experienced operator, I probably like the idea that non-mission critical work is being taken off my plate so I can focus on where I have the most expertise. But I can also see that people probably resist to full kit the rest of the work because it diminishes their influence. How do you overcome that resistance?
When I say standardizing the work, I'm not saying that you make the work repetitive because it's not. You cannot impose standardization on non-standard work. It's non-standard. It will take, maybe in the future it will become. So for me, when I say non-standard, it means that I reduce the dependence on the experts to do the job. Now you may say maybe the experts will resist, they lose power, etc. But in most organizations, the experts now are so overloaded. They themselves feel unproductive because of that. Super busy, but not productive. We don't see that resistance. They would be very happy that others will make less mistakes that they need to fix, believe me. Okay? So when we ask them to full kit, to prepare with others, actually it gives them power. Okay? They will be the one that will dictate how others will do the job and will prepare them. And as I mentioned, it's several milestones during, it's not just at the beginning. This is not diminishing their power. And I'll tell you a secret, most of them also hate to be managers. So if you're able to take some of these managerial, you won't see a lot of resistance. It's resistance in our minds, in the managers' minds, not in their minds.
I would also imagine that if you go down this journey and you standardize, right, more of the work, you systematize it, that you might also need less managers, right? Because if the work flow is more predictable, if the work flows evenly, you need less managers to tell people what to do and fly by wire, right? Micromanage the process. Do you see that's like TOC also contributes to maybe like flatter organization?
Why do we need managers? Sometimes when I speak with the people in lectures, etc., I ask this question: Why do we? And generalize all the answers you get, you will come to three challenges that needs to be managed. One is complexity, that you have all these different elements that needs to be synchronized. One is uncertainty, that you cannot eliminate uncertainty, it needs to be managed. Uncertainty in demand, uncertainty in the variability of outputs, etc. And another one is we need to manage conflicting requirements by different stakeholders, customers, suppliers, etc. Conflicting requirements in the product design, like it needs to be cheap, it also needs to have a high quality, whatever it is. So The more complexity, the more uncertainty, the more conflicting requirements, the more you need managers. If you're able to deal better with complexity and create a synchronization, if you're able to deal better with uncertainty, to put the right processes in place, and if you're able to resolve the key conflicts, you don't need managers as much as before, which is a good thing.
Wonderful. Rami, thank you so much for coming on the show and talk to us the theory of constraint. I want to emphasize the need to read this book, The Goal. I think it's a great read. What are some other resources for people to learn more about theory constraints?
Let me focus only on one because it's a very recent book that was launched a year ago, written by my sister, by the way. And the book is called Goldratt Rules of Flow. I have it here. Goldratt Rules of Flow. And so, if you are intrigued about bad multitasking, about standardization issues, about how you manage full kit concept, how you manage projects work, how do you manage environments where work is less standard, less repeatable, and you still need to get a lot of projects done and faster with the same resources, that's the book for you. So, and it's also written as a novel. By the way, Thomas, when I read your book, Fixing Work, which I really liked as well, I thought these two books are complementary.
Thank you so much for the kind words on the book. And we'll put links to the various books and also your website into the show notes for our readers. Listen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe, like, share, or comment. Until next time, let's make work matter.